Our next speaker is Sean Boyd from the FDA, and he's going to speak about the role of the FDA in image quality and patient safety. Sean?
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to share FDA's perspective and discuss a little bit about our initiative that we announced in February of this year to reduce unnecessary medical imaging exposure. And I hope that every participant here is able to take back some of the great messages that we've heard over the past couple of days and really permeate some of the things that we've talked about throughout the clinical and physics community. The objectives that I'll cover this morning will be FDA's role in ensuring patient safety through regulation of the medical imaging industry, how FDA rules are formed and updated, and how folks in this room can influence that process. And then, most importantly, I'll cover FDA current and planned activities that we have underway to improve equipment safety with regard to CT specifically. So just a brief overview of our mission is to ensure the safety, effectiveness, and quality of medical devices and ensure the safety of radiation-emitting products. And if you look at the waterfront of radiation-emitting devices and products that FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health can cover, it spans the entire electromagnetic spectrum and a variety of consumer, commercial, industrial, and medical products that basically amount to potentially any product that can emit any form of radiation. Now, we only actively regulate those products for which there has been shown to be a risk to the public health, and that we've gone on to create specific rules and regulations in the Code of Federal Regulations. So, in summary, for radiation-emitting devices, there are multiple laws that rad-emitting devices are subject to. And those include the medical device amendments to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the electronic product radiation control provisions of the FDCA, and the Mammography Quality Standards Act. So depending on the product or device that we're talking about, it may be subject to 1, 2, or 3 of these sets of laws. 20-second overview of medical device authorities. You have to tell us, or industry has to tell us, who they are and where their facilities exist, what devices they intend to produce. They have to describe the quality systems that they have in place or maintain quality systems to ensure they can consistently build safe medical devices. They have to go through a process to clear devices before they are sold on the U.S. market. And when they discover problems, they either need to recall, correct, and remove, or let us know about adverse events that they become aware of. Likewise, for electronic product radiation control, industry has to comply with performance standards if the product that they build is subject to a performance standard that we have in our regulations. They have to certify that their products meet those standards based on their own internal quality control testing program, and they have to submit reports to us that describe how their products comply, how they're safe, and describe their quality control testing programs that ensure the same. And as with medical devices, industry has to let us know when they become aware of defects or failures to comply with their products, and if their products are involved in an accidental radiation occurrence specifically. I was asked to talk about the process for developing regulations and guidance, and for those of you that don't recognize this, this is a glacier. And I put this up just to make the point that it is a long, unfortunately cumbersome process for FDA to develop new or update existing regulations. This does not mean that the option of writing regulations to improve CT equipment safety is off the table, but it does mean that in the immediate term, regulations is not going to be the way that we address a lot of the problems and desires that the folks in this room have expressed that they would like to see incorporated into equipment to improve safety specifically. The things that we are going to do over the coming months are to write guidance. And specifically, we're going to write guidance for special controls for pre-market review of CT and fluoroscopic equipment. Special controls are guidance documents and that describe information needed to facilitate pre-market review and clearance for CDRH Office of Device Evaluation and in vitro diagnostics staff. Special controls will define labeling information that's necessary, testing that needs to be performed, and other data on equipment features that help assess or address the unique risks posed by certain medical devices. The other way that we use guidance is by recognizing internationally or nationally developed consensus standards. And if industry in its pre-market submission declares conformance to a particular consensus standard, they may not have to provide data to support what conformance to that consensus standard means. We also look at consensus standards and reference them in guidance to simply advise industry or the professional or user community as to what FDA believes is correct or should be done with respect to a particular device, test, or other item that might be covered by a consensus standard. So one message I wanted to leave everybody with today is if you have an idea for specific guidance that you would like FDA to write or recognize, share it with us. Quick, write down that URL. If you go to FDA's website, click on the Medical Devices tab in the top center of the screen. There is a section for industry assistance. You'll find the words Guidance Documents, and that will describe all the guidance that we intended at one point to write in fiscal year 2010, and other guidance that we've published, and describe the process by which anybody in this room or anybody in the public can recommend guidance for FDA specifically. Okay, so I want to talk most importantly about the FDA initiative to reduce unnecessary medical imaging exposure. And as we've been talking about the past couple days, the goal of FDA's initiative is to, in the same way, ensure that each patient get the right exam at the right time with the right dose through principles of exam justification, making sure that only medically necessary examinations are performed, and dose optimization, making sure that the individual's dose is minimized while maintaining the image quality necessary to make a clinical diagnosis. Contrary to what you may believe, the Cedars-Sinai event and New York Times articles and others did not alone motivate this initiative for FDA. It was the NCRP report that published in 2009, and after seeing that, we had begun to develop plans to address this increase in the U.S. population's total exposure to ionizing radiation, because it is largely due to medical imaging, and that is exactly where CDRH at least has regulatory authority to influence the manufacturer of the devices responsible for that increase. That same report showed that the majority of medical imaging exposure was from CT equipment, nuclear medicine, and interventional fluoroscopy equipment. And again, these are areas where CDRH has direct authority to make an impact on the safe production of these products specifically. And certainly the media and congressional and other interest added urgency to our need to act more quickly. So specifically, the FDA's initiative scope covers these 3 high-dose medical imaging procedures. And again, CDRH has direct work planned for both CT and fluoroscopy equipment. Nuclear medicine, because we feel the issues are more related to the radiopharmaceutical that's administered during the exam. That is something that's covered by FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. We are working with CDER to address issues with nuclear medicine specifically, although we've heard the message that PET-CT and fusion imaging, we can't forget about that, and we need to address the combined dose delivered from these 2 imaging modalities used together. Here are the 3 goals of the initiative that I want to go through in a little bit more detail over the coming slides. The first goal of the initiative is to promote safe device use. And again, this is an area where FDA will seek to establish safety requirements for CT and fluoroscopic devices, specifically to require that equipment be capable of displaying, recording, and reporting dose and other imaging parameters. And certainly, as we've heard over the past couple days, physicists have an important role to play here in explaining to users in their facilities what each of these displayed values mean and how to use the information. We also want to require access controls to ensure that only certain users are able to make certain changes to imaging protocols, that simply individuals that are currently using the equipment are tracked. And again, physicists, I think, will have a role here in having some kind of advanced or permissions to access particular features of the equipment, particularly when we're talking about reviewing and approving imaging protocols specifically. We want to look to require that equipment throw up alerts when certain reference values for dose for a given imaging exam or an upper limit for a dose value for imaging exams are exceeded, and require that at least those alerts be acknowledged, and possibly a lockout and override function be provided if an upper limit is exceeded. And again, we heard from MITA during our public meeting in March that their dose check initiative will accomplish exactly these specific things. We also want to require that equipment be dose optimized upon installation within the default settings within the for the equipment. And again, this is something that we heard yesterday, that it may be installed dose optimized, but radiologists or others want a brighter, better image, and those techniques and parameters get changed immediately after installation. So again, physicists have an important role here in ensuring that during installation and acceptance testing, protocols are dose optimized, and then throughout the useful life of the equipment, that situation is sustained for each of the pieces of equipment at their facilities. And while FDA doesn't have a direct role in requiring training for users specifically, we want to ensure that adequate information is provided by manufacturers to facilitate training of users. And again, physicists have an important role in training users that they interact with every day. Again, within promoting safe device use, one of the most important federal partnership that FDA is pursuing will be to work with the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services to enhance facility quality assurance practices. We've heard a little bit about MIPA and for non-hospital or standalone clinics. Hospitals are regulated under Medicare conditions of participation, so the two groups are different within CMS, and the way the regulations and sub-regulatory documents or guidelines that better define how those regulations are implemented are a bit different. FDA's goal is to continue to work with CMS and the accrediting organizations that they have recognized at this point to refine those accreditation criteria, make sure that they are consistent for both hospital and non-hospital entities, and more consistent across the three different accrediting organizations. And again, we've heard that they're very different for the three different accrediting organizations, to primarily incorporate principles of dose optimization and exam justification. We're also interested in promoting efforts by NCRP, ACR, and others to develop diagnostic reference levels, both locally at the facility level and more broadly. Eventually, we would like to see something of a national dose registry created, not necessarily to be a regulatory tool or hammer to be applied to a facility, but to provide freely, publicly accessible information that will inform facilities so that they can improve their clinical practice and sustain a good quality assurance program with respect to imaging. The second goal within our initiative is to support clinical decision-making. FDA has authority to establish record-keeping requirements for industry, and specifically for CT and fluoroscopic devices. Some of the things that we will seek to do will be to ensure that equipment can facilitate linking of dose information with patient records, and to facilitate transmission of imaging data to a local or larger database specifically. Now, DICOM structured reports will basically define some of that in terms of the metadata that might be used to describe an imaging exam specifically, but we've also heard that much work needs to be done to standardize the specific nomenclature for various scan parameters that we would need to consider and look at as well. We'd also like to see incorporation of exam ordering systems, and with this we look to promote efforts to develop appropriate referral criteria upon which those exam ordering systems would help providers make decisions on whether a particular exam is justified. The third goal within our initiative is to increase patient awareness. This X-ray history card has been available on FDA, well, I guess we used to mail it out, but it's been around almost as long as I've been alive, and it's intended to provide a simple tool for a patient to use to track their personal medical imaging history. We're working right now with the ACR and Image Wisely folks to update the content and messaging on this card, put some new slick Image Gently like branding on it so that it's more attractive and appealing, and really serve as an interim tool to allow patients to track their medical imaging history. In the meantime, we hope that information systems become advanced enough where this type of information would be electronically captured or automatically captured in a electronic medical record, for example. So the last few slides I want to close with a future state that I think, having heard various talks over the past couple days, that I think can be achieved. Some of this work is already underway or being done. Others, some of the other work may not have yet been begun, but can be achieved, I think, with all the groups that are responsible for seeing this happen working together. So let's say a new radiology clinic is built somewhere in the United States. They purchase a new CT system and they want to begin performing CT exams. In order to do that, by 2012, they'll have to gain accreditation to perform CT and other advanced medical imaging exams under MIPA as required by CMS right now. That accreditation is going to be based on its own, that facility's quality assurance program. That quality assurance program should ensure that staff are trained to properly use equipment and its dose reduction features. That quality assurance program should also ensure that the facility routinely reviews its own utilization data, assesses dose protocols, and other information to ensure that its exams are justified and that dose is optimized for individual exams. Patients will come to this facility equipped with their new, not the old one, new medical imaging history record in hand that will give them some talking points to sit down with their provider and say, is this exam necessary? What are my alternatives? What does it mean in terms of the dose I'm about to receive? And staff are trained to talk about the risks and benefits of the medical imaging exam they're about to undergo and answer those patient questions. Turning toward equipment features that I think we'd like to see in the future is that a hospital exam ordering system would be in place to evaluate exam appropriateness before it's performed. The ordering system would make this determination or make a recommendation based on specific referral criteria that were either established by a facility or published and established by medical professional organizations specifically. Imaging protocols within this equipment would be reviewed in advance. System settings would require verification, or the system would require verification of settings, control access to any changes, and track modifications made by staff. And again, there are clear roles where medical physicists have to play in ensuring that this work be realized. The system could automatically retrieve information from a hospital data system and or larger or more broadly established dose registry to help verify that settings and dose are within an expected range that might be defined by the facility or defined more broadly, and throw alerts again when those settings or dose are outside the range expected, or if the patient recently had another medical imaging exam. And finally, during each exam, the system would automatically collect imaging settings and dose data and transmit this information to hospital RIS or PACS systems, a patient electronic health record, and a national dose registry. So knowing that some of this stuff might be in place right now, other things have yet to be developed, and certainly many of the tools that hospitals would have to use to make this information usable in informing clinical decision making. I think the point is that nothing worth doing is easy, but having heard the energy in this room over the past couple of days and the real interest in accomplishing some of these things, I think we can get there.
Bob, this has to be a quick question.
Okay, I think the patient dose record is largely a waste of time. The risk of a given CT scan is independent of how many you've had in the past. It's a stochastic type of risk. The risk from your first CT scan is the same as the risk from your third CT scan. In other words, there's a risk I'll be killed driving to work every day. Do I need to keep a log of how often I've driven to work? And will it affect my decision on driving to work tomorrow? It's the same idea.
I understand, and the intent of the dose record is not to get to risk specifically, but it's to get to informing patients and providers that maybe a similar exam has just recently occurred, and giving patients a tool that they can use to make them more aware of what they're experiencing.
It's got to be quick, Jim.
Okay, data from the National Evaluation of X-ray Trends is vitally important for diagnostic reference level determination.
Right.
But there's been a lot of delay getting data out of the next program. Has there been any changes at the FDA to facilitate that?
We will be looking at our next program to improve the way we collect and analyze data. We are looking to add more resources to it. I mean, recently you've seen that we've published the raw data from NEXT on our website, but one of the things that you'll realize is the amount of manipulation, analysis, and cleaning of that data that is necessary before it can actually be useful. So we are looking to transform and improve the NEXT program over the coming years as well.
Thank you so much. Sean, thanks so much. I'm sorry to rush you. With John Boone's permission, and with his agreement that he'll shorten his talk, I've asked Bill Heatdirks, who is the Director of Extramural Science Programs at the NIBIB, works directly with Rod Pettigrew, to make some comments about what he's heard here today, briefly.
With the emphasis on briefly, and for that reason I specifically did not include any slides. I just really want to make comments on two things. One is just to say a little bit about NIBIB, which for those of you who don't know is the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering. We have a mission which is to improve human health. That's where we start, but to improve human health by leading the development and accelerating the translation of biomedical technologies. And in that, so we're focused on technology and translation. We're also committed to integrating physical and life sciences to make this happen. And this comment yesterday about the three radiologists, I think, in the burning building, not being able to agree whether to get out, is perfect. Except we've got a deeper problem. We've got the scientists, the radiologists, the life scientists, the engineer. They're not even going to be able to agree whether the building is burning or not. One person is going to say, it's not the building that's burning, it's just this room, and another person is going to say, and besides, the risk is not the burning, it's the smoke, and another person is going to say, wait a minute, this place is burning now, we're going to die if we don't get out of here, and the other person is going to say, let's look at the statistics of this. Really what it is, what's the adjusted years of life that we're going to lose if we don't get out, and shouldn't we have a power analysis? And I say that in jest, but I also say it because it's actually very important for understanding what an institute like NIBIB does. So if I leave you with one message, I mean, we are a funding agency primarily. We fund research around the country. But if I can make a sort of a simple statement, and I want to read it so I get it straight, but I would say that if you were going to take home one message about what we do, is that we're really a system for distributing research fund awards around the country by peer review. And I ended with peer review because that's the most important thing in that statement. Peer review means your peers. And you combine the notion of peer review with the other comment about, that we really support interdisciplinary research. And it's really a tricky business because to all of you, I would say, the physicists, the radiologists, this is your institute, and it is an interdisciplinary institute. For this being your institute really means two things. Number one, it means, you submit grant applications to us and we fund them. But equally, it means the way we do that is through a peer review process, which means not only is it absolutely essential that you are, sending in grants and we've got a whole infrastructure to help you out with that, but also that you're very, very actively involved in the peer review process. And so that's my my little harangue on that. One more thing, just to talk about very, very briefly, which is this meeting, because it aligns very much with our interests, and I'll just highlight some of the things that we've been most interested in recently. And one is decision support. So this whole realm of decision support at the time of order entry of radiological examinations. So that's one area of research. Why is that research? Well, is it effective? What is the impact? What's the appropriate way to do it? Another area of interest is sharing of images, and both of those are really aimed at reducing unnecessary exams. Dose tracking in patients is something that we've got a lot of interest in, something that I actually haven't heard very much talked about here today, but is independent measurement of the dose. So, we hear a lot about milliamps and milliamp S, whatever that is, but, the engineer in me at least wants to say, come on, put a sensor on that and give me a measure. And, first of all, what's the research is asking the question, well, what do you want to measure? Around the eyes? Do you have to make 10 measurements along the body? Is one enough? But don't give me milliamps, give me measurements. So that's another area of research. Dose reduction is obviously one which this meeting was great for me. It gives me a much better appreciation of how that trade-off occurs, and that square root function is really going to be a problem. I can see that. And then also sort of standards in vocabulary and standards in protocols. And for us, I think the standards in both of those areas, the standards of vocabulary ties very much to electronic records, etc. The standards in protocols ties very much to, obviously we are a research organization. We're interested in improving healthcare, but also in clinical trials. So, my simplistic view of this is that a study ought to be hospital independent, technician independent, company independent, generation independent, time independent, all of those things. As I've listened to it, I thought, well, that the vendors ought to start throwing something at me, because that's all of that sounds like I'm anti-innovation, and so the other thing is we ought to have innovation. Obviously, we love innovation, but to close off on that then is I think that there do need to be standard protocols as well as innovative protocols that ideally extend not just across the Mayo system or across another system, but across the country. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Bill, I think I can speak for everyone in this audience, and I hope you'll take these thanks back to your colleagues at NIBIB. Thank you for all you do in support of the efforts of all of us in this room.